And so this workshop today is a LEX Advanced workshop. It's one of our advanced topics, and we are going to talk about group work, and we're calling this Facilitating Group Work in Your Brightspace course. And Elizabeth and I will present some information to you. I always like to start off inviting you to join the conversation about educational technology. So if you do tweet, I invite you to join that conversation, and you can use these hashtags. The workshop slides and resources that we're going to reference in this workshop or on our wiki, and you can find that at catwiki.zula.edu/group, or you can scan this QR code to get there. And as I mentioned, we are talking about group work today. And you may recall that the Learn Everywhere Zula course was designed around the 8 Quality Matters standards. And in particular, the standards that apply here would be standard 5.2, which is where learning activities are going to provide opportunities for interaction that are going to support active learning, as well as standard 6.2, which is course tools promote learner engagement and active learning. In addition to these Quality Matters standards, I'd like to refer back to these 7 principles of good pedagogical practice. And principle number 2 develops reciprocity and cooperation among students. If you look at the details of this, good learning is going to be collaborative and social. Working with others often increases the involvement in learning. And the other principle would be the encourages active learning. And with this one, learning is not a spectator sport. Students must talk about what they're learning, write about it, relate it to the past experiences, and apply it to their daily lives. And with that, we have this question. Elizabeth?
So let me just real quick get the camera right. Did that do it? I can't see, Janice. Did that get me?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So here's what I want us to think about. So we want to start with a little bit of discussion. And so we'll let the people online chat with each other. And then, Jay, I will chat with you. And what we want you to think about before we even start talking about group work and then get into how to do it well on Brightspace, we want to talk about what benefits have you already seen from group work? Because, you know, we probably all use group work in our class in some way. So what benefits have you seen or do you foresee? And then what challenges have you seen or do you foresee? So I'm going to actually set my timer and we're going to take 5 minutes. So if you all will talk in the chat, I will talk with Jay. I'm going to mute us in here real quick so we don't get too much of our back chatter, but I'll unmute us in 5 minutes. What benefits or challenges of group work have you seen? Unmute. All right, everybody. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to real quick show the grid so I can see people's faces. And let's hear from, nice to see you, Martha, nice to see you. Hi, everybody online. Hi, Ashley. Let's start with people online. What would you like to share from what you talked about in the chat?
Well, challenges in my trying to use group work is that most of the students want to really work, they're used to working independently. And then the other challenge is that there are some who are in the group who don't pull their load. Okay, yeah. So kind of resistance because they're used to working independently, but also that social loafing where if I'm in a group, I don't have to do as much as I would do. We're going to talk about that, a solution with that when we talk about accountability. Somebody else online. What else would you like to share from your conversation?
I
I was gonna say that the good thing is they get to know each other and kind of bounce ideas and different perspectives. But my challenge was kind of like the same thing that Dr. Earls mentioned.
Okay, thank you. What about in the room? Anybody would like to share? Jay?
I was just thinking about something else in response to Ron's comment, because I teach an asynchronous class, so I did a big kind of group project over the course of much of the semester. And one of the complaints I got from some of the students was, and I also kind of picked up on it, is that they, in an asynchronous class, they don't get to know each other. Even if I put them into groups, it's kind of like they're often never even engaged, physically engaged with each other. And so there's almost like a hindrance to it by being like asynchronous mode. Even in groups, they can know each other.
Okay, yeah. So the format of the class makes a real difference, right? If it's an in-person class versus an asynchronous class. Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything before I move us to the next?
I have another one.
Thanks,
Elizabeth,
Ashley.
when
Yeah.
they are placed in groups, they want to sit mainly usually with their friends or people who they feel most comfortable with. And so when we assign groups, they're not generally happy because they don't want to be with the people who you assign them to work with. And we're strategic about, making the groups diverse and asking you to work with people who you would not usually work with.
Yep. I definitely have experienced that as a challenge, even when I'm doing in-class group work. One thing that I have found, and again, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, we're going to talk about some of these things, but one thing that I've found is that, I usually let them, their first groups, so this is informal groups, like for group work in class, their first groups, I let them choose so that they have that kind of feeling of autonomy until we get to know each other as a class a little better. And then like after their first quiz or their first exam or whatever, then I say, okay, we're shifting groups. And then I do something like every time we're going to shift groups, I'm like, oh, get with your group and say goodbye. We're moving on. And you try to make it like that. But definitely when it comes to a big group project that affects their grade, that's even more of a resistance. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for sharing that. Appreciate it. Okay, Janice, let's move to the next slide, please. Let me shrink us again here. Okay, so to use group work or not, and then how to use it, I think we need to think about what are the, here's some questions we'd say that you really need to consider. I think sometimes we put in pedagogies unintentionally, like we don't really think about them. We're just like, oh, I want to do group work. So we just plug group work in, or I want to do this, and we plug it in. But if you're going to use group work, which I think is really important, here are some things to consider. First is, what is your motivation for doing this? Like, what is the purpose? When Jay and I were talking during our discussion just now, he mentioned that employers want this, right? This is a skill that we now know that graduates should have and graduates need. So I think that it's really important. And then Janice already in her introductory remarks talked about it's really important for active learning and collaborative learning. But I think that deciding where is our emphasis? Is it because we want them to gain some group work skills? Is it because we want them to get the content? Those kind of things can really drive which direction, how we use it and how we design our group work activities. Next is, who should be involved in designing and Number two, Janice, who should be involved in designing and delivering the group work, and what resources do they need? Here, we've talked about this in CAT before. The more that you can include students in decisions and designing assignments and designing things, the more buy-in you're going to get. It comes back to Ashley's point about is there any way to let them pick some people in the group? Maybe not all, but maybe some. Who should be involved in this and what should we do? Then how will you assess the group work and what do you want to evaluate? When you're doing group work, and we're going to talk about ways to have accountability and things, but when you're doing group work that's going to be assessed, so we're talking about like assignments or projects here. how are you going to assess this? And is it going to be purely on content, or is there going to be a component of assessment that's also about the functioning of the group? And again, that should go back to number one, what's your motivation, right? How are the groups performed? We've touched on this. How much time is needed to complete the activity? One thing I have found, I get much more buy-in on group work. Not again, like group work is like a teaching method, like, okay, we're going to cover this material today and I've got group activities as part of active learning. But group work in terms of a project or an assignment or a paper or something like that, I get much more buy-in if I give them some class time to actually work in groups. It helps me then ensure that the groups are forming good norms and good availability. And then it also gives them time to meet there. And then what technology, and this is what Janice is going to talk about in a moment, what technology will best support the groups. Thank you, Janice. Let's move to the next slide, please. So there's different kinds of group work, also referred to in the literature as teamwork. There's low stakes, shorter term, more informal group interactions. And then there's higher stake formal team projects, right? So we're going to be talking about how you can use Brightspace for both of these, but keep in mind, again, this would be your motivation behind each one of these would be different, and your assessment behind each one of these would be different. Okay, even though you can use Brightspace to do it. Thank you, Janice. Let's go to the next page. So here's some examples of a low stakes, short term, informal group interaction. And we all do these. I know we all do this in our class all the time. Here's just one example. But this is when you are going to build in some group interaction for while you're teaching, like while you're delivering material. Think, pair, share. Said this before. If I got to name this, I would name it something different. I'm not crazy about the name Think, Pair, Share, but that's what it is, and it's very descriptive. But in Think, Pair, Share, you give students time to, you throw a question out to them, and it needs to be a challenging question or question that takes some thought at least. You give them time, gasp, to even think in class. How much time do we actually give people to think in our classrooms? But you give them time to actually think about this. Then you have them pair up and talk about it, and then you can share with a broader group discussion. We do Think, Pair, Shares all the time. We kind of just did it right in here in this workshop, even though the chat wasn't quite a pair. But it's this is an example of like something we build in. It's low stakes. It's usually not graded, but it's a great way to use groups for teaching material. All right, thank you, Janice. Another example is doing a peer instruction, and here you can post a conceptually based question. Again, these can't be really easy questions, or you don't get good discussion. But you have a question, you then have students answer it, show the answers, then you have them discuss, and then you have them re-answer it, right? So you can, again, you're not reteaching this material, they're teaching to each other. It's a great way to get collaborations and also interaction and use groups. Okay, thank you. Another one, this is more complicated or complex, I guess, but it's a really cool thing to do. And I'm thinking for my pharmacy colleagues, I bet there's some cool stuff you could do with this, a jigsaw classroom. I don't know if you've ever used this, but it's when you divide students into groups and they become experts. Let's say, again, please forgive me, I'm not a pharmacist, but let's say you're teaching for a class of drugs and you're teaching for side effects, right? Then you could give each group a different side effect. So you've got 4 groups, each one has a side effect, and then you want them to become experts on the mechanisms behind those side effects. That could be a really bad example, please forgive me. But you make them, have them be that. And then what you do is each little group becomes an expert, and then you stir up these groups and put them together, and so that they teach each other. It's a great way to use collaborative learning. We know that we learn best when we have to teach something, right? That's when we learned our disciplines, really, was the first time we taught our disciplines. And so it's a great way to leverage that with students using short-term group work. All right, thank you. So those are the kind of informal group work activities that we can use, use in our teaching to break up lecture, to leverage active learning. And then, of course, there's the more formal cooperative learning groups, the more formal team projects, the more formal group activities. And this is when students work together over a period of time to complete a joint task or a assignment, right? So this is what we think of typically when we think of like a group project, right? Some outcome. They're working together. It doesn't have to be for the whole semester. For example, I'm making my final be a group activity. So they'll start working on it now through the final. So it's just, you're working together for a period of time. But the goal in this one is you have a outcome that's going to be graded, right? That's going to be assessed, right? So those are the two types, informal and then more learning groups. Thanks, Janice. Next one. So some best practices for designing group work, and I'll talk about each one of these quickly in detail. One is you want to create interdependence, right? And interdependence in psychology means that my outcome depends on your outcome, that we can't just parallel play. Group work that is not effective is just parallel playing. And we've seen it, right? You do your part, I do my part, we paste them together, and now we're done. That's not effective. Yes, Mark.
I got a question from Andrea. Is collaborative learning groups the same as cooperative learning groups?
Great question, Andrea Edwards. I'm assuming that's who that was?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. Yes. So the whatever's in vogue to call it has changed over time. Collaborative learning, team-based learning, cooperative learning, active learning in pairs. It's there, depending on the studies you look at, there will be subtle differences in how an individual researcher might use that term. But as far as individual terms, it's kind of this umbrella for collaborative term. Yeah, thank you. Great question. Also devote time specifically to teamwork skills. If you're going to use group work, especially if it's going to count toward their grade and be part of their grade, please take time to kind of talk about how groups should function, right? We don't just throw people in the water in content. We give them structure, and we should do the same thing for group work. And then build in individual accountability. All right, next one. So for creating interdependence, we want to structure the project so that students are dependent on one another. When students kind of each do their part and tape it together, it's because we have created assignments that allow that to happen, right? So we want to ensure that the projects are sufficiently complex so that they have to draw on each other's knowledge and skills. We want to be sure that there's goals. This is back to those questions we need to be asking ourselves, goals that need to be met through collaboration. We can help assign roles to facilitate. If a group is struggling, we can help assign roles. There are different things we can do. If it's for instance, if it's an oral project presentation, you can have in there that they need to practice with each other, that they need to have a transition from one to another where they're both. So instead of like, here's my part, and here's Mark's part, and here's Jay's part, we can just say we each have to have in the transition where we're both presenting some things. You build that into the roles. All right, next. Thank you, Janice. I'm devoting time to teaching teamwork skills. We can't assume students already know how to work in groups, especially within our disciplinary perspectives, right? Because even if we are having group works in class and it's, we're building these team skills that transcend, we are still asking for them to do this within our disciplinary perspectives. And so we need to train them. Do they know that teamwork is one of the most things that employers want? Like, let's make this clear to them. We need to address their preconceptions about group work. Ask them, what do you hate about it? And then get them in their groups and say, now, what can you do to minimize what you hate about it? One of the best things with group work is not just having this final outcome deadline. That's one thing I need to work on as I'm creating my final right now, but setting little interim deadlines, right? Because effective group work doesn't happen the 36 hours before the outcome is due, right? And establish ground rules, teach and reinforce conflict resolution skills. Be there for your students. Okay, but devoting time to teamwork skills. Creating an accountability. This is one thing that's also really important to do, and this is to not just evaluate the work of a group as a whole, we got to do that, right? Because that's the point. But there has to be some slice that where individual group members demonstrate their learning. Now you can do this not as part of the outcome of the project, like still the group project, everybody can get the same grade, but perhaps you use discussion posts along the way. And what was your contribution this week, or informal journaling, and then they're getting points for this or not. Another really good thing to do is to have students rate each other. Like how do we do, but again, not at the very outcome only, but on the process along the way. This week, grade yourself and everybody else in your group on how you did, right? And that provides some accountability. Okay, and we can talk about these for a long time, and you could share in the chat other things that you've done for each one of these. But I just want to reiterate before we move to kind of the nuts and bolts of Brightspace here, creating interdependence so that it is a real group project, teaching some teamwork skills because you're asking them of it and you're going to be grading some stuff, and then also building in individual accountability. So you can't have that social loafing, or it minimizes social loafing. Okay, best practices there. Okay, and with that, I will turn it back over to Janice.
All right, thank you. I'm assuming you can still hear me, right?
Yep, we sure can.
Okay, great. All right, so in Brightspace, there is a groups tool, and you will find it on the nav bar under groups. When you are creating groups in Brightspace, just keep in mind that the groups can have, each group can have its own discussion forum, it can have its own assignments, and then there's also a locker area. And this is basically an area where students can share files. Students can belong to multiple groups within the same course, and then you can grade the members of the group as a team, or you can grade them individually. When you're creating a group, you have to create a grade category. And this is going to be the assignment or the activity that the groups are related to. And I have some examples here. So for example, it could be that the group category is going to be for class presentations. And each group category has to have a group prefix, and this is going to be assigned to each group in the category. So for example, with class presentations, you can have the prefix be just the word group. So it would be group 1 under class presentations, group 2 under class presentations. But you can edit those group prefixes to, if you need to, further identify those subgroups within that category. Also, when you're creating groups, you have to choose an enrollment type. And so the enrollment type basically is how is the group formed? Is it based on the number of people that are going to be in the group, or the number of groups that you need in the class? Or are you going to be manually enrolling students in the group? Can they self-enroll? Do you want the system to auto-enroll the students? You have to make those decisions. And when you are choosing the enrollment types in Brightspace, you'll see it's will appear in this format. And like I said, it's basically just what I said, number of groups or groups of number. Do you want auto enrollment or not? Can the student self-enroll? And so on. And with that, I will stop my sharing and then turn it over to Elizabeth. She's going to show you some.
Now I can see everybody. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Andrea. Hi, Janelle. Nice to see y'all. Now I can see everyone. Okay, so what we want to do now is show you one way I've used this tool in my class to facilitate a group work project. So to do that, I want to start by showing you the assignment, because I don't think it's as meaningful to see the groups in Brightspace unless you understand the assignment. So I'm going to share my screen very smoothly here, right? Come on, we can do it. All right. Hide video, hide. Okay, there we go. Okay, so everybody can see my screen now, yeah? We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So here was my assignment. This was from my health psychology class in 2021. All right, Janice, there we go. Here is it. And you don't need to read all this. I'm going to walk you through it, but I just wanted to tell you this. So in health psychology, I organize the class around 8 therapeutic lifestyle changes that we know impact well-being, both physical and mental, as much as therapy and drugs. I've got a ton of research that these lifestyle changes impact health. And so it's physical activity, time in nature, diet, social support, et cetera, right? So we have, so we have these 8 TLCs, therapeutic lifestyle changes. And what we do in this class is we engage in October, we're actually in it now for this semester, but this is from 2021. We engage in 30-day challenges together. And I like students to have autonomy, right, to be able to choose which TLC they want to work on, because everybody has different priorities, right, for their health. So they get to choose which TLC they want to work on. So this assignment is written in this transparent format, right, with the purpose of what this is, the task of what they're going to do. And the task is with a group of classmates, you're going to choose a challenge from these options I provide. They even have, like for autonomy, they even have different levels. So you can decide what level you want to do. And then they do a presentation or a report where they're sharing with others about this 30-day challenges. And it's got very clear instructions. Here's what your report should include. It should include a summary, why it's important, what factors help you succeed, what barriers, and then what advice would you give to somebody else? And then finally, what plans do you have for this behavior moving forward? And then I've got a rubric. All right, so that is the assignment. So let me now, okay, so I want to share with you my my health psych class so you can see how I use Brightspace to do this assignment. So under here, under Brightspace, you see we've got the tab up here in the nav bar that's groups. So you click on groups, and you can see Janice already talked about the way you create groups is you click on new category. When you click on new category, it's going to give you, I'm going to click on it for a moment. It's going to give you, you can name your category. Mine were my 30-day challenge groups. You can put a description. How many groups do you want? Again, the enrollments, what's the prefix going to be? Okay, so everything Janice just talked about in previous slide is right there. So that's how I created my groups, and I called them 30-day challenge October. And then this is the group for the 30-day October 30-day challenge. And you can see I created 6 groups, right? So if you click on, and I just named them group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you click on this group, you can see I can put a description in there of that. Oh, sorry, I want to show you. This is also where you can enroll users, because this was not self-enrollment or auto-enrollment. I enrolled them in there. So this is where you do that. Cancel. Here you can see the members of the group. So here are my members of the group. And I enrolled them in there once they chose their challenge. And then if you click on there, there's the assignment. And that's just a regular, you just create it as a regular assignment. This is where they post their
Do you click on that and let's see what it looks like?
Yeah, it's got their grades. So
Never mind.
It's just a regular assignment.
It's just a regular assignment page. I don't want to click on it because it's being recorded and it's still there. But it's just like any other assignment where it's got where they can post it and you can grade it. My rubric's attached there. After we're not recording, I'm happy to show that to everybody if you want to see that at the end.
Okay, we got 2 questions.
Yes.
Questions. When students self-enroll, can we blind them to the names of others who have enrolled in the group?
Great question, Janice.
No, they will see their group members.
Okay. And then, Dr. Edwards, what criteria do you use for selecting students in a group? Yours, for this one, it was the topic, right?
Yes, so that's a really good question too. It should totally depend on your motivation and objectives behind this assignment, right? Ashley mentioned earlier she wanted real diversity of her different groups of pharmacy students, and so she picked them based on that kind of criteria for that team-based learning and the groups that they were in. In mine, I let them pick which challenge. They ranked their challenges. I mean, they ranked their TLCs 1 to 3, and so that everybody got, their top couple choice, and we had some balance in the groups. But they got to kind of pick that way. Other people, Jay, how have you picked groups before?
I've done random. I've done also kind of more manipulative, where I kind of look at their past performance.
Yeah.
And try to spread them around a little bit.
Yeah. So he said that, he's done totally random, random self, or you can let the system, Brightspace will do that for you. You can also, it's a really common way after you've got students' grades to put some strong students and some students who need some support in a group together and let them, because the stronger students are going to learn a lot by teaching and the other ones are going to learn that. That's a very common way of doing it. Mark,
yeah, I just put the topics in the group number. I mean, instead of group 1, I would say Hinduism group, and then let them assign on their own.
Yes, and that's another way you can do it. So like in the groups, I could have easily, I think group 1 was physical activity and group 2 was, and I could have done that and let them select on their own. It's really, there are a bunch of ways to do it, Andrea, but the big thing I would say about doing it is make sure it matches the objectives of what you want to do. Make sure it matches the objectives.
Ashley mentioned that with diversity, she looks at grades, age, etc., all those things, so that it's not too homogeneous.
Yep. Absolutely. Great questions. But this way also so when I click on assignment, it takes me to the regular assignment page, just like you would do like activities assignments when you're going to grade a reading guide or something like that. It looks exactly the same. My rubric's there, but I make one grade, hit it, and it goes to everybody in the group. And so it's nice because I can do some summative comments in that, comment section of there, like, this is a really creative idea and you did a good job on this, and it goes to everybody in the group. And so I also find the group activity not just for building groups, but also it eases in the grading because they're not passing around a paper with my notes and they all get it in real time.
All right. And so we're just talking about the grading of assignments and submissions. So when you set up your group assignment, and this is an assignment, if Elizabeth had shown you the assignment in the course, you would see that for the assignment type, it is going to be the group assignment, and you just indicate which group category it is. When you do this, any member of that group can submit the assignment on behalf of the student, and then all you need to do as the instructor is just grade one submission per group. And so when you go back to your group assignments, you would see here, it would show up with the group names, and you would grade this the same way you would grade an individual assignment. It works the same way. You can, even though that when you grade it, that one grade would go to all members of the group, you can override the grades for an individual student. So if you needed to make an adjustment on the grade for one or two of the students or whatever, you could do that as well. And then I recommend when you are trying to create group assignments and group discussions that you create the groups first without trying to create the assignment or the discussion during that group creation process. When you then go in to create your assignment or your discussion, then when you get to the part where you have to indicate the assignment type or the topic type, just indicate that it would be a group assignment and then choose the group category. Otherwise, if you try to do this in the group creation process, the system is going to kind of bounce you around. So to simplify your workflow, I suggest just creating the group. If you want to have this associated with assignments or discussions, then when you're ready to create that assignment or discussion, just go back and tell the system which group category that should be associated with. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, and as we wrap up here, when you're doing this, working with groups, we do want you to reduce your workload. And so, as Elizabeth kind of mentioned, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So design assessment tasks and feedback those strategies very carefully. Definitely help students plan and manage their groups, and then utilize technology that's available. All right, and so do we have any questions at this point? Do a quick check-in.
I have a real quick technical question that sounds
Yes.
like Mark might be able to answer. When you do the self-selecting groups, what do the students actually, like they click on the groups link
Yeah,
and then they just get presented with the options? And it says,
Yeah.
like join this group or?
right. It just lists the groups,
Uh-huh.
and they just go in and click on Hinduism or Buddhism, and they're enrolled in that group. And
And they can't like double enroll or anything like that?
no, and you can't, and of course there are limits, so you can't have more than
They
four.
can cap it
Yeah, cap.
if they don't get there early enough.
Right, right. And so that way I try to be fair is to say, you have until midnight. No, what I say is midnight Sunday night, I'm going to turn it on. That way everybody should be awake and ready to have their groups.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? If not, I have some tips for you. Group work tip number 1. You can create the groups before users have been enrolled in your course. However, if you set up your groups after the enrollment, this would ensure a better distribution of the users between your groups. So just keep that in mind. Tip number 2, groups have a maximum enrollment of 200 users. I suspect most people will not reach this limit, but just be aware that that is there. You can create new group categories, and so there's no limit on the number of group categories, but like I said, there is a maximum enrollment of 200 users in a group. Group work tip number 3, and this is about the self-enrollment. They can join and leave the groups up until whatever expiry date that you have set. Once that expiry date comes, then anybody who is not in a group at that time will be placed in a group, and then users cannot leave or change groups after that time. Tip number 4, utilize the online discussion forums. This would be very helpful for students to be able to answer each other's questions. If you set up a frequently asked question discussion forum, then both you as well as the students can provide answers to the students. Tip number 5, utilize the rubric tool. If you haven't tried the interactive rubrics, then I suggest you may want to try that, because this should simplify the grading and would provide you with consistent evaluation and feedback for your students. Tip number 6, we talked about this. When you want to evaluate the group assignments, you're going to do that in the assignments tool. And then if you need to override any of the grades for an individual student, then you would do that in the gradebook. Tip number 7, there's also a surveys tool. If you haven't used that, you can utilize that to get feedback from the students to be able to help with improvements to your design for future group assignments. I have a couple of potential pitfalls. Users, they can belong to multiple groups in the same course, but they cannot self-enroll in more than one group within the category. All right. And pitfall number 2, as you may have discovered in Brightspace, there are options that once you create them, they cannot be changed. So carefully consider your options when you're creating items in Brightspace, because there is a point where some things are locked and you won't be able to change those. All right. And so hopefully, I know this was really fast. We only had the 50 minutes, but hopefully you all do have come away with this seeing some value of having group work in your courses. So I'm hoping everybody is at the thumbs up or headed toward the thumbs up.
I'm thumbs upping. We're thumbs upping.
All right. And then I want to remind you that in the Learn Everywhere Zula course, we do have a module for the interactive rubric. So if you're not familiar with that and you want to get some more information, just look for that that module in the Learn Everywhere Zula course. There's also some information on online discussions, which is a workshop we had earlier this semester. So that is in the LEX course as well. And then I do invite you to provide feedback to Brightspace through the product ideas exchange. So Brightspace is looking for feedback from the users, and they are very responsive. So check out the product ideas exchange. And if you have some suggestions to make Brightspace better, you can provide your suggestions there. As a reminder, workshop slides, recordings, and resources are available on our wiki. And this is the URL catwiki.zula.edu/group, or you can scan this QR code.
And there's a bunch of good resources on there. I just want to add, we being Janice, have curated a bunch of good resources. Okay.
Right, because there's some things that we didn't get around to covering in this workshop, but we have some links to various resources there that would help you. Are there any questions? And your attendance today in this workshop has earned you this group work badge, and you will see this in the in the LEX course. And just because I can, I'm going to give you some confetti. All right. Are there any questions while we wrap up? I know we're right at time. I'm going to stop my sharing.
Thanks, everybody, for those of you. Thank you, Janice. Thanks, everybody who needs to go to their next thing. If you want to hang out, I'm happy to show you that assignment part if you want. It's just the assignments, though. So you can let me know. But thank you all. So nice seeing your faces.